Probably been told hybrid seeds are the upgrade. Bigger yields, sturdier plants, more disease resistance. That's the whole pitch, right? Better breeding, better results. But here's what nobody selling you seed packets wants you to actually test. Put an heirloom and a hybrid side by side in a real garden, not a lab, not a greenhouse, an actual backyard with actual weather. And the story flips. Hard. It's not luck. It's not tradition for tradition's sake. It's biology. Real, measurable, testable biology. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why and exactly which 7 plants to put in your own dirt this season to see it for yourself. 7 plants. 7 specific reasons each one outgrows what you'd buy at the store. And one of them is carrying a story that even most heritage gardeners get wrong. I'm saving that one for last. It's going to change how you look at every seed packet on that rack. Let's start at number 7. Number 7. The Dixie Golden Giant Tomato. Here's the mistake almost everybody makes with big slicing tomatoes. You plant the pretty 6-pack from the garden center, you wait all summer for those huge beefsteaks, and then July hits. Heat spikes past 90 for a week straight. What happens? The flowers just drop. No fruit. Or the ones that do set crack right open on the vine before you even get a knife near them. So people quietly give up on growing big tomatoes and just buy them at the store instead. Sound familiar? Here's why that keeps happening, and why this one plant doesn't do it. Most modern big-fruited tomatoes were bred to look good and ship well, not to handle heat. Under real stress, they can't keep their systems running, so the plant sheds flowers to protect itself, and whatever fruit does form tends to split. The Dixie Golden Giant does something different. It holds on to its antioxidant capacity and keeps moving sugars through the plant even past 90 degrees. That's the whole reason it doesn't flower drop or split. It's not luck. It's a plant that never got bred away from handling stress. Now, the honest trade-off. The skin on this one is thin and delicate. If your watering swings wildly, bone dry, then a soaking rain, it will crack, heat or no heat. The fix: consistent moisture, not perfect moisture. A layer of mulch does more for this tomato than anything else you'll do all season. When you plant it, bury the stem deep, right up to the top few leaves. That buried stem grows its own roots on the way down, and a bigger root system is what lets this thing shrug off a heat wave in the first place. What you get for that little bit of care: a 1 to 2 pound lemon gold beefsteak, dense and meaty, barely any seeds, sweet enough to eat like an apple standing at the counter. A tomato that outgrows the store-bought version simply by refusing to quit when it gets hot. But heat tolerance is one thing. Our next plant doesn't just tolerate heat, it needs it, and it's got a root system built to go looking for water nobody else's tomato would even try to find. Number 6. The Amish Moon and Stars Watermelon. Here's the mistake with watermelon, and almost everyone makes it. You baby it. You water it every day, sometimes twice, because it's 90% water, so surely it needs constant water, right? That logic feels right, and it's exactly backwards. Constant shallow watering trains the roots to stay lazy near the surface. The first real dry stretch of summer, that root system isn't built to reach for anything, and the vine stalls out. This one does the opposite from day one. It sends a deep taproot straight down, hunting for moisture on its own terms instead of waiting for you to hand it some. That's what gives it real drought tolerance, and it's also what gives it strong resistance to a soil-borne disease called fusarium wilt, the thing that quietly kills off a lot of backyard watermelon vines by midsummer without anyone knowing why. Once that root system is established, the plant runs its leaves hot on purpose, high transpiration, cooling itself down, while it keeps stacking sugar into the fruit underneath all that heat instead of stalling out from it. Here's the actual fix, simpler than what most people are doing. Water it well at planting and for the first couple weeks. Then back off. Let the topsoil dry out between waterings so those roots have a reason to go deep. You're not neglecting it, you're training it. One honest catch: this variety wants a long, hot season, 90 to 100 days of real summer. If your area runs wet and humid, keep an eye out for anthracnose on the leaves. Good airflow, and not crowding your vines handles most of that. I have to talk about how this thing looks. It's not subtle. Dark green rind covered in bright gold spots, scattered like a night sky, and the leaves even pick up the same yellow speckling. It's the kind of plant your neighbors stop and ask about over the fence. But the flavor's the real payoff. Dense, sweet flesh from a plant that spent its whole season getting stronger instead of getting babied. Root systems built for real conditions instead of easy conditions. That's the thread running through this whole list. And our next plant takes that even further. It doesn't just tolerate a hard start, it actually needs one. Want me to keep going into #5, the Mayflower bean? Remember, that's the one carrying the origin story we're circling back to. Number 5. The Mayflower bean. Some folks call it the Amish nuttle bean. Here's the mistake almost every gardener makes with beans, without even thinking about it. You wait. You wait for the soil to warm up. You wait for that last frost date to pass. You wait an extra week just to be safe. Most of the time, that's the right call. Modern bean seed rots fast in cold, wet spring soil. So everybody plants late, and everybody loses a few weeks of the season doing it. This bean doesn't play by that rule. It germinates reliably in soil that would turn a store-bought bean seed to mush. That's not a fluke. It's a plant that partners exceptionally well with the natural rhizobium bacteria already living in the soil, and that partnership is what lets it fix its own nitrogen right from the start, feeding itself while it's still pushing up through cold ground. You're not fighting the calendar with this one. You're planting 2, sometimes 3 weeks earlier than everything else in your garden, and it just gets on with it. Here's the how-to. Get it in the ground as soon as you can work the soil, well before your last frost date. You don't need to wait for warm soil the way the seed packet tells you to. Give it something to climb. This is a vigorous pole variety, 6 to 10 feet of vine, so a trellis or a fence line, not a bush bean cage. One honest trade-off, if you're hoping to eat these fresh as green beans, pick them young because the pods toughen up and go stringy fast. Where this bean really earns its keep is dried, shelled out at the end of the season into that beautiful cream and mauve speckled seed, stored in a jar for soups and baking all winter. And that name, Mayflower, isn't as simple as it sounds. I'll come back to it at the very end. Our next plant doesn't ask you to rethink your calendar. It asks you to rethink how much space you're willing to give up. Because this one gets big, really big. Number 4. The Amish Pie Squash. Here's the mistake, and it's an easy one to make. You plant a smaller squash because you think you're being efficient with space. Less sprawl, less mess, easier to manage. Then storage season comes around, and that smaller squash is soft and spoiling by December, and you're back at the grocery store buying canned pumpkin for your pie. This one flips that trade completely. We're talking 60 to 80 pounds per fruit, heart-shaped, thick-walled, dense orange flesh. That thick rind isn't just for show. It's what lets this squash sit on a shelf in a cool, dry room for 6 months and just get sweeter. No canning, no freezing, no power required. The reason it grows that big and that dense is an aggressive, wide-ranging root system that goes out hunting for phosphorus and potassium locked up in composted manure. Nutrients a lot of shallow-rooted squash never even reaches. Let me ask you something. If your compost pile were quietly making your food less safe instead of more, would you actually know? Most people wouldn't. That's the part of this story nobody tells you. Composted manure is genuinely one of the best things you can feed a heavy feeder like this squash. But here's the catch. If that manure isn't fully composted, testing has found soil can see something like a 9-fold jump in salmonella and a 2.5-fold jump in listeria. That's a real risk, and tradition alone doesn't protect you from it. The fix is specific. Your compost pile needs to hit 131 degrees Fahrenheit and hold there for 15 straight days. That's the number that actually kills the pathogens instead of just aging the manure and hoping. A cheap compost thermometer solves this completely. Skip that step, and you're not doing heritage gardening, you're taking a real health risk and calling it tradition. Do it right, and here's your payoff. Co-compost aged manure with a little charcoal or biochar before it goes in the bed. That charcoal locks in nitrogen that would otherwise wash away. Keep the leaves dry with drip irrigation instead of overhead watering, since this one's prone to mildew. By fall, you've got a squash that'll feed your family pie, soup, and roasted sides clear through winter, from a plant that cost you nothing to replant next year. Space is the price of admission on this one. But our next plant asks for space too, and in exchange, it solves a problem that ends most people's squash growing altogether. Number 3. Pennsylvania Dutch Crookneck Squash. Some call it the neck pumpkin. Here's the mistake, and if you've grown zucchini or summer squash for more than a season, you already know this one by heart. Everything's going great. Big leaves, plenty of flowers, fruit setting, and then one morning the whole plant is just wilted flat, like it got hit by drought overnight even though the soil's damp. You go looking for the problem, and by the time you find it, it's already too late. That's the squash vine borer. It's the single most common reason backyard gardeners quit growing squash entirely. Here's why this variety doesn't go down that way. The stem on this squash is solid and heavily lignified, tough, almost woody, all the way through. A vine borer needs to tunnel into a hollow stem to do its damage, and it simply can't get a foothold here. The larvae can't establish themselves, so the plant just keeps growing right past the pest that would have killed a modern zucchini in days. On top of that, it's naturally resistant to bacterial wilt and holds up well in dry stretches. You're not fighting 3 problems at once, just the one trade-off I'll get to now. Plant it once you're solidly past frost, in soil worked deep with plenty of compost, because this thing wants to run. And that's the honest catch. Those vines ramble 10-15 feet, easy, not a plant for a small raised bed or a container. Give it a corner of the yard it can sprawl into, or better yet, let it run along a fence line where it's out of the way. It also takes its time, a good 100 to 120 days to fully mature, so this is a plant you commit to at the start of the season, not one you squeeze in late. What you get for that space and patience? A long, curved, tan-skinned squash with dense, sweet orange flesh, almost no seeds in the neck at all. They're all clustered down in the round end, and a squash plant still standing strong in September, while your neighbor's zucchini died of vine borers back in July. We're halfway through the countdown now, and I want you to notice something. Every one of these solves a specific problem: heat, drought, timing, pests. Our next one solves a problem you might not even think of as a plant problem at all: getting bitter in the heat. Number 2. Amish Deer Tongue Lettuce. You know this one already, even if you've never heard the name. Beautiful spring bed of lettuce, salads every night. Then the first real heat wave rolls through, and the whole bed turns bitter and bolts overnight. So you quietly give up on summer lettuce and go back to buying bagged greens the rest of the season, the same way basically everyone does. Here's why this one doesn't quit on you. Past about 75 degrees soil temperature, most lettuce starts producing bitter compounds as a stress response. The plant panics and turns unpleasant on purpose. Deer tongue holds off on that. It stays sweet and structurally stable, well past the point everything else in the bed has already turned, so you keep harvesting deep into summer instead of surrendering to the produce aisle. One real trade-off: its root system is shallow and not a strong feeder, so thin soil will make it struggle worse than a hybrid would. Give it rich soil with plenty of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, a little afternoon shade in hot climates, and it rewards you all season. That's 6 down, 6 plants, 6 specific mechanisms, every one of them beating the store-bought version for a real, provable reason. And now, number 1. The plant carrying that 400-year-old story I told you I'd come back to. Before I give you number 1, I owe you the story I've been holding back since the very first minute of this video. That bean from a few minutes ago, the Mayflower bean. Here's the legend, the one that's been passed down for generations. It supposedly crossed the Atlantic on the Mayflower itself in 1620, tucked away with the Pilgrims as one of the first crops planted in the New World. Great story, almost certainly not true. And when you actually dig into the history, the trail points somewhere else entirely, to Seneca and Iroquois growers, who were cultivating this exact bean long before any ship arrived, under a name of their own, the Cornhill bean. Here's why that matters for everything I've just walked you through. The real story of American food self-reliance was never one tradition working in isolation. It was indigenous growers and Pennsylvania Dutch farmers and Amish families all doing the same patient, unglamorous thing for centuries, saving seed from whatever survived the real conditions of a real year and planting that seed again. Nobody was chasing a legend. They were just quietly building plants tough enough to keep feeding people. That's the mechanism I told you about at the very start of this video, the one science only recently caught up to. It was never one group's magic. It's what happens anywhere people do this work long enough, honestly enough. Which brings us to number 1, the Amish Paste Tomato. If you've only heard of one heirloom tomato in your life, it's probably this one. There's a reason it became the flagship of the whole heirloom movement. It traces back to Wisconsin in the 1870s, passed quietly through families for over a century before it reached Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and it's now formally protected by Slow Food USA's Ark of Taste, officially recognized as a variety worth preserving before it's lost for good. Here's the mistake people make with paste tomatoes, and it's the same one that sends everybody to the store for canned sauce. They grow aroma, and every dry spell, the fruit ends up with ugly, sunken black spots on the bottom. Blossom end rot. It's caused by the plant failing to move calcium to the fruit fast enough under stress, and Romas are notoriously bad at it. The Amish paste tomato manages that calcium distribution far more efficiently, so it shrugs off the same dry spells that wreck a Roma crop, and the flesh itself is built for exactly what you'd use it for. Dense, meaty, almost no seed cavity, about 30% less water than a typical slicing tomato. That's not a small detail. Less water means less time standing over a pot boiling sauce down, which means the sugars and aromatics stay concentrated instead of cooking away for hours. One thing to watch for, it's an indeterminate vine with sparse foliage, so the fruit is more exposed to direct sun than a leafier plant, sun-scald if you don't manage it. Stake it well, and let a little extra foliage grow in rather than pruning hard. That natural shade is doing real work protecting the fruit. Plant it, save seed from your strongest plants at the end of the season, and next year's crop is a little more suited to your exact patch of ground than it was this year. That's the whole engine behind every plant on this list. Not one magic trick, but generations of exactly that. So there they are, 7 plants, 7 real reasons they outgrow whatever you'd buy at the store. Dixie Golden Giant Tomato, holding its flowers through a heat wave that would strip a modern beefsteak bare. Amish Moon and Stars Watermelon, sending roots down after water, instead of waiting for you to hand it some. The Mayflower Bean, up and growing in cold soil that would rot anything from a store rack, carrying a history longer than the legend most of us grew up with. Amish Pie Squash, turning composted manure into 60 pounds of pie filling that'll sit on a shelf all winter, done safely. Pennsylvania Dutch Crookneck Squash, standing there in September with a stem the vine borer can't even get into. Amish Deer Tongue Lettuce, staying sweet weeks after every other lettuce in the bed has gone bitter and bolted. And the Amish Paste Tomato, managing its own calcium so well it laughs off the dry spells that wreck aroma. 7 plants, 7 mechanisms, 0 magic, just generations of people saving seed from what actually survived. If this changed how you look at your seed order this year, hit subscribe. I've got a lot more of these deep dives coming, and you don't want to miss the next one. And I want to know, which of these 7 are you putting in the ground first? Drop it in the comments. I read every one. None of this takes a homestead. It doesn't take 50 acres or a horse-drawn plow. It takes 1 raised bed, 1 packet of the right seed, and the willingness to let your garden get a little tougher instead of a little easier. Start with one of these 7 this season. Just 1. Save the seed at the end of the year. Plant it again next spring. That's the whole secret, and now you've got it. I'll see you in the next one.